month in a row. That's the difference a Labour government with a plan and willingness to fund it makes.
Sir Ashley Fox.
To number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 4 and 15 together. I'm proud of the enormous contribution North Sea workers have made to our country, and that oil and gas will be an important part of our energy mix for decades to come. We have a workforce that leads the world, and we are determined to secure their long-term future in the energy industry, including oil and gas. The UK Government will soon respond to our recent consultation on supporting the energy transition in the North Sea, and I'm in the North East tomorrow, turning on a wind farm and also meeting leaders in the oil and gas sector.
Sir Ashley.
Mr. Speaker, if the UK achieves net zero in 2050, we will still consume about 14 billion barrels of oil and gas a year. We are currently on track to produce 4 billion barrels a year. Will the Secretary of State explain why he prefers to import our energy than produce it ourselves?
Mr. Speaker, our national mission of this Labour Government is to get to clean power by 2030, but that means 3 things. It means renewable power, it means nuclear power, and it also means oil and gas. As I've said already, oil and gas will be with us in the Scottish and UK context for decades to come.
Harriet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A recent report by Offshore Energies UK showed that if the UK oil and gas basin was continued to be used until 2050, it could produce half of our oil and gas needs. That would do wonders for jobs in the North East of Scotland, the North East economy, our energy security, the energy transition, and it would also bring in £12 billion to the Treasury. On top of that, it would also bring in £150 billion of economic growth to the UK, which I'm sure everyone in this House and the Government would welcome. So will the Secretary of State please have a word with the Energy Secretary and ask him to stop his policies which are continuing to ruin our oil and gas sector and for once back North East Scotland?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady mentions the oil and gas sector in 2050, and I've already mentioned at this dispatch, as is the Secretary of State, Des Nez, that oil and gas will be with us for decades to come, including to 2050.
Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree with me that there's an opportunity for significant economic growth in Scotland from getting a just transition from oil and gas to clean power right? In my Edinburgh North and Leith constituency at the Port of Leith, you can see the land and space previously used for oil and gas sector has been transformed by investment from Forth Ports to the largest renewable hub in Scotland. Will he join with me in welcoming this investment in Leith and outline how his department will help secure every job possible in the transition from oil and gas?
Mr. Speaker, can I commend my honourable friend for the work that she's doing, particularly in her constituency in the Port of Leith, to make sure we can have the transition and have it well. But what she highlights is the important thing about this particular issue and debate, that the energy mix requires us to have renewable power and clean energy by 2030, but it also requires us to have nuclear power, and it also requires us to have oil and gas. The energy mix means we do it all. It's not either or.
Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State rightly outlines how important oil and gas sector is to Scotland and to the workers and businesses rely on it. But if we are to have a truly just transition, we need to invest in new technologies like hydrogen now. And that's therefore will he join me in welcoming the shortlisting of the Selmsmuir hydrogen project in the Livingston constituency. It's been shortlisted for UK Government support and can outline how this will benefit the Livingston constituency.
Mr. Speaker, on the 7th of April, the UK Government announced that 8 Scottish projects had been shortlisted for the next stage of the HAR2 process. I and my ministerial colleagues look forward to working with industry to deliver our vision for a thriving low-carbon hydrogen economy in the UK, and of course commend my honourable friend for the work that he's done in pushing forward the project in his Livingston constituency.
Secretary of State Andrew Barr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Secretary of State, does he agree with the Scottish Labour leader who says that there is no question it has to be new oil and gas? Or does he agree with his colleague, the Energy Secretary, who's banned new licences in the North Sea and is overseeing an accelerated decline of the UK's oil and gas basin?
Mr. Speaker, there's obviously a consultation on the just transition happening with the Department at the moment in terms of the Secretary of State that he refers to, but I just go back to my previous answers. In order to get to clean power by 2030, in order for us to have an energy mix in this country, you require oil and gas, you require renewables, and you require nuclear. It's a simple process.
Goodbye.
Well, I think we all heard there, and I'm sure Keir Starmer certainly heard there. He was unable to agree with his own leader in Scotland. So in hawk to the UK Labour Party that he can't stand up for Scottish workers or its oil and gas industry, and can't even agree with their own leader in Scotland. It's always been the party interest over the national interest with Labour, and no notice taken of its Scottish Labour Party. 10 years ago, the Scottish Labour Party was described by its own leader at the time as simply being the branch office. Nothing has changed, has it?
Mr Speaker, the sole purpose of this government initially in the first few months was to clean up the mess that his government left of this country, which included the £22 billion black hole. We'll get on with delivering our missions, including clean power, by 2030. That's what we're focused on, because that's what's good for jobs, good for bills and good for the environment.
Robin Swan.
Question number 5, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, under the Windsor Framework, the Northern Ireland Plant Health Label allows growers and traders to move plants and seeds for planting from Great Britain to Northern Ireland without a phytosanitary certificate, and Scottish businesses have benefited from this. For example, more than 1,500 tonnes of previously prohibited seed potatoes have moved to Northern Ireland from Great Britain last year, mostly from Scottish traders.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Minister will know that McIntyre's fruit and plant in Scotland has actually said that it's easier to supply Japan than it is to send plants to Coleman's nurseries in my constituency in South Antrim. And the same company has now seen orders cancelled in Northern Ireland. At the weekend, Ewing Seafoods, Northern Ireland's oldest fishmonger, had a 40-foot container filled with hundreds of thousands of pounds of fresh fish returned from Belfast to Scotland due to administrative paperwork errors on 7 boxes. So will the Minister or Secretary of State meet with me in representation of those companies to see what can be done to ease what is a bureaucratic burden on Northern Ireland business and Scottish business?
Mr Speaker, I'd be delighted to meet with the honourable gentleman, but let me reassure him the Horticultural Working Group, co-chaired by senior officials from DEFRA and the Cabinet Office, has been set up specifically to tackle issues around movement of seeds to consumers in Northern Ireland as a first priority. I know he's mentioned other topics too, and I'm very happy to meet with him on them. That group meets regularly to address issues and includes representatives of the Ulster Farmers Union, the National Farmers Union and the Horticultural Trades Association. Business leaders, as well as a small number of other horticultural businesses, also sit on that working group. I'd be delighted to discuss this further with him.
Chris Kane.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Scotland produces world-class potatoes that supply our iconic fish and chip shops, like the Real Food Cafe and the Green Welly stop in Tyndrum, Vincenzo's in Stirling, whose fish supper won an award last year, and Corrieri's in Causeway Head, where Robert and Peter Corrieri retire this year after decades of service. Will the Minister recognise their value to our local economies and say what more can be done to support the supply chains linking Scottish growers to these much-loved businesses?
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend will be aware that potatoes are, of course, a staple of our national dish, haggis, neeps and tatties. They're a staple of my favourite breakfast, the dry potato scone. I'm delighted to join him in recognising all of the fish and chip shops in his constituency, and I'd be delighted to accept invitations for a fish and chip shop tour from any of my colleagues across the House to recognise their vital contribution.
David Mundell.
Number 6, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, I'm sure that wasn't for me. We know that this will be a concerning time for businesses in Scotland. In 2024, 12.3% of goods exported from Scotland were to the US. That is why the UK Government is focused on negotiating an economic deal with the US. As the Business and Trade Secretary made clear in his statement to this House on the 3rd of April, the Government is resolute in our support for industries across the whole of the UK, and ministers and officials will continue to engage with the businesses to understand the impact that these tariffs may have.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I associate myself with the comments on Pope Francis and indeed Christina McKelvey, and wish you, Mr Speaker, a happy St George's Day. It's very important that we all celebrate our national identities but still come together as one united kingdom. I hope that the Secretary of State and I were not too optimistic in our last exchange on trade with the US, when we hoped that the Trump administration would actually be a boost for Scottish business in the United States. Can he tell us specifically, though, what he's doing in terms of the UK discussions with the United States to ensure that specific Scottish interests, like the whisky industry, are part of those arrangements?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said at this dispatch box before, it's vital we do all we can to strengthen our diplomatic, cultural and business ties with the United States. I was in Washington and New York for Tartan Week on the week that tariffs were imposed on the rest of the world and made the case for Scotch whisky and Scottish businesses in particular. We're engaging with Scottish exporters and industry representatives to assess the potential impact of US tariffs and remain in contact with US counterparts. Our pragmatic and calm approach has been overwhelmingly welcomed by business and industry. We will not conduct this important issue in a knee-jerk way to get retweets like some others in this House.
Mr. Speaker, will the Secretary of State join with me in welcoming the pragmatic and calm approach of our Prime Minister on this issue, in the clear interests of businesses and consumers, and in contrast to those on the opposite benches who seem only interested in social media and quick headlines?
I couldn't agree with my honourable friend more. The pragmatic approach from the Prime Minister and this government in terms of this issue has been welcomed by industry and businesses right across the United Kingdom. That is in the national interest of the United Kingdom to do so, and we work very hard together to make sure the impact of US tariffs on the UK are not as bad as we thought they might be.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Steve Darling.
Question 1.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the entire House will join me in paying tribute to His Holiness Pope Francis, an extraordinary man. His lifelong work on fairness will leave a lasting legacy. And people of all backgrounds and beliefs were inspired by his humility and his compassion. And I think the outpouring of grief and love that we've seen in the last 2 days or so shows the respect and admiration that we've held in around the world. Mr. Speaker, I will attend his funeral on Saturday and pay tribute to his courage and to his leadership. May His Holiness rest in peace. Mr. Speaker, may I also wish everyone in England a very happy St George's Day. There is a lot to celebrate: our history, our values and our culture. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition, by duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Steve Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I also wish the Chamber a happy St George's Day. After a cost of living crisis overseen by the previous chaotic Conservative government, many in the tourist industry in Torbay believed that they had weathered the storm, as they had believed in Devon and Cornwall. However, with the government's NIC hikes and effective jobs tax, many in the tourist industry in Torbay fear that this could be the last nail in the coffin of some of those businesses. So in light of this summer, will the Prime Minister give me the pleasure of showing him round Paynton Zoo and seeing this outstanding, amazing tourism attraction in Torbay, one of many across the west of England who are sadly being massively impacted by this jobs tax? Well, Mr. Speaker, that's very... Well, look, may I start by wishing Jenny, his guide dog, a very happy birthday, I think, for yesterday. 6 years old, although she doesn't look particularly interested in my answer, I have to say. Mr. Speaker, look, I do recognise the importance of tourism to his beautiful constituency. I've been there many times, worked there for a short time, and driving growth and creating jobs. We've announced a new Visitor Economy Advisory Council, which will work with business to deliver a new strategy focused on supporting growth and the tourism industry. Visit Britain has also launched a new international marketing campaign to showcase Britain's incredible heritage, culture and landscapes, and I know the Minister of Tourism will be happy to keep him updated.
Charlotte Littler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme hasn't been uprated with inflation since 2012, meaning compensation for victims of violent crime, including rape and child abuse, is worth less than half what it was then in real terms. The consultation response published before Easter said there wasn't the money to look at changing the scope, tariffs or time limits, despite expert advice and the recommendations of the ICSA review. So will the Prime Minister commit to properly funding the Ministry of Justice to do this vital reform work so victims and their needs can become a priority instead of an afterthought?
Well, Mr Speaker, the honourable friend knows my personal commitment to delivering justice for victims of crime who've been completely failed over the last 14 years. We are improving access to compensation through better online systems and equipping staff with the skills they need to better support victims. We are, of course, also consulting on a revised Victims Code that will increase the powers of the Victims Commissioner to ensure more accountability, and I'm happy to ensure that she meets the relevant minister to discuss those issues.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr Speaker, can I also wish everyone a happy St George's Day? And can I also associate myself with the remarks about the passing of His Holiness Pope Francis on Easter Monday? Being married to a Catholic, I know the profound loss for millions in Britain and across the world. Mr Speaker, does the Prime Minister now accept that when he said that it was the law that trans women were women, he was wrong?
Well, Mr Speaker, let me be clear. I welcome the Supreme Court ruling on this issue. It brings clarity and it will give confidence to women and, of course, to service providers. The Equality and Human Rights Commission will now issue updated guidance, and it's important that that happens and that all service providers then act accordingly. This government's approach and my approach has been as follows: to support and implement the Supreme Court ruling, and we will; to continue to protect single-sex spaces based on biological sex, and we will; but also to ensure that trans people are treated with respect, and we will; and to ensure that everybody is given dignity in their everyday lives. I do think this is the time now to lower the temperature, to move forward and to conduct this debate with the care and compassion that it deserves, and I think that should unite the whole House.
Mr Speaker, he can't bring himself to admit that he was wrong. That was the question. But he spoke about respect and dignity and compassion and lowering the temperature. So will he now apologise to the member for Canterbury, the very brave member for Canterbury, for hounding her out of the Labour Party simply for telling the truth?
Mr Speaker, I've always approached this on the basis that we should treat everyone with dignity and respect, whatever their different views, and I'll continue to do so. And I'll tell you, Mr Speaker, for why. Because when we lose sight of that approach and make this a political football, as happened in the past, then we end up with the spectacle of a decent man, and he was a decent man, the previous Prime Minister, diminishing himself at this dispatch box by making trans jokes whilst the mother of a murdered trans teenager watched from the public gallery just up there. That will never be my approach. My approach will be to support the ruling, to protect single-sex spaces and treat everybody with dignity and respect. And I believe there's a consensus in this House and the country for that approach.
Mr Speaker, there is no apology for the member for Canterbury. There is no taking of responsibility. He talks about political football. He practically kicked her out of his party. Constructive dismissal. Constructive dismissal. He talks about my predecessor. What about the abuse I faced from his MPs calling me a transphobe for supporting what the Supreme Court has now clarified in his words? And where was he? He hid for 6 days without commenting on the Supreme Court judgment. Why did it take him so long to respond? Isn't it because he was scared?
Mr Speaker, the only fiction here is the idea she delivered anything in office. She held the post of Minister for Women and Equalities for 2 years, and she did precisely nothing. She provided no clarity on the law, did nothing to improve women's lives, which got materially worse under her watch. They talk, for example, about hospitals and mixed-sex wards, uphill and down-dale. What happened in the last decade? The use of mixed-sex wards in our NHS rose by 2,000%. And there's a pattern of behaviour here. Women and Equalities Minister failed to do anything for women. The Trade Minister, who failed to get a trade deal with the US. The Business Minister, who failed to get a deal with British Steel. She's a spectator, not a leader.
Mr Speaker, I will tell him what I did. I stopped the gender... I will. Yes. When his Labour leader in Scotland was whipping his MSPs to get male rapists into women's prisons, I stopped that gender recognition bill. I helped commission the CAS review. I replaced the guidance on single-sex toilets. I made sure that the puberty blockers issue was resolved while he was sitting there cheering on the ideology that was taking away safe spaces. And when the Prime Minister stayed silent last week, presumably waiting for what Morgan McSweeney thinks, on his WhatsApp groups, some of his closest ministers were plotting to overturn the Supreme Court decision. Labour MP after Labour MP stood up yesterday and challenged the ruling. How can we take his government seriously on this?
Well, I think the WhatsApp group you should be worried about is the one of his shadow Justice Secretary. And Mr. Speaker, the mask has slipped just 1 week before the elections because the shadow Justice Secretary is not here. A man who's doing everything he can to replace her. The man that most of them want as leader of their party has admitted that Reform and the Tories are working together. He said, I want this fight to be united. He said he's determined to bring this coalition, he calls it, together one way or another. Well, I think we know what that means. Every Tory voter is appalled at the thought of paying for the NHS. Every Reform voter who hates what the Tories did the last 14 years, they're not Conservatives, they're a con.
Who's playing political football now? He's got no answers, Mr. Speaker. He's got no answers. Yesterday, Labour MP after Labour MP challenged the ruling. He should be more worried about his backbenchers than my frontbenchers. Labour ministers called the chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission appalling. Baroness Faulkner's role is critical to enforcing the court's judgment. She has had to put up with relentless abuse, not just from his front bench, but from activists and ideologues. Reappointing her will be a clear sign that he is taking this issue seriously. So will he commit to reappointing Baroness Faulkner when her term expires this year?
Mr. Speaker, I've always said the debate should be conducted properly on the principles of debate. I've said it many, many times. But I would remind the Leader of the Opposition that when they were in government, violence against women and girls reached record highs, rape prosecutions fell to record lows, and millions of women were left stuck on NHS waiting lists, unable to get the health care that they needed. Under this Labour government, NHS waiting lists down by more than 200,000, domestic abuse specialists in 999 control rooms. We've strengthened access to maternity pay, something she calls excessive. She talks about political footballs, but a coalition between Reform and the Tories being formed behind her back, we know what that means when the Shadow Justice Secretary and the member for Clacton cook up their joint manifesto. NHS charging a pro-Russia foreign policy, end to workers' rights. Just as the Love government lost control of the economy, the borders and health, in 6 short months, she's lost control of her party.
Mr. Speaker, he's clearly so uncomfortable talking about this subject. Yes. This is a choice between a Conservative Party that stood up for common sense and a Labour Party that bent the knee to every passing fad. This is a question about moral courage, Mr. Speaker, about doing the right thing even when it is difficult. And the truth is, he doesn't have the balls. The Prime Minister only tells people what they want to hear. He only tells people what they want to hear. He is a weather vane who twists in the wind. He cheered an ideology that denied safe spaces to women and girls because he thought it was cool to do so. He hounded a brave female MP out of his party for telling the truth he accepts now. And now he is hiding behind the Supreme Court judgment. And isn't that because he doesn't know what he actually believes?
I can only assume that sounded better when she did it in the mirror earlier on. But the truth is, it doesn't really matter what the Leader of the Opposition says, because nobody believes, none of them, that she's going to lead them into the next election anyway. It's going to be the Shadow Justice Secretary. He's away plotting, that's why he's not here today, Mr. Speaker. And the member for Clacton fighting over the bones of the Tory party. and they think Reform are going to give them their votes without changing their policy. Absolutely no way. The member for Clacton's going to do what he always does, eat the Tory party for breakfast.
Andrew Pink.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I wish you and the House a happy St George's Day as well. I recently had the pleasure to visit the National Gas Operations in Peterborough, where the company was announcing a £350 million investment in the UK, including 100 new jobs at least in my constituency. This investment will make Peterborough the centre of the nation's core gas and hydrogen network. But one of the big challenges that infrastructure projects like this face is the lack of available skills and training for young people. So can I ask the Prime Minister what more he can do to boost apprenticeships in places like mine and ensure we create the opportunities this country so desperately needs?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend? The net zero transition is a huge economic opportunity for this country, despite the naysayers on the opposition benches. And we've had almost £44 billion of investment since July, and that will deliver jobs across the country, including in his constituency. Investment, presumably, they don't want. We're ensuring we've got skilled workers that we need, launching the Skills England and our new growth and skills offer to encourage even more apprenticeships, and supporting industry-led plan for hydrogen to deliver the workforce needed for the industry of the future.
Sherrod David, Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I also wish the House and the country a happy St George's Day, and can I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to the late Pope Francis? As a Christian myself, I found his compassion absolutely inspiring, and my prayers are with Catholics in the UK and across the world who will feel his loss particularly deeply. Mr Speaker, I've raised with the Prime Minister before the issue of North Devon District Hospital. The last government promised to rebuild it, as they did hospitals across the southwest in places like Torbay and Musgrove Park. Unfortunately, they broke that promise, leaving appalling conditions like sewage leaks and patients being treated in corridors. So will the Prime Minister reconsider his decision to further delay the construction of new hospitals and ask his MPs to vote for our motion today for new hospitals?
Mr Speaker, the previous programme of the party opposite was undeliverable and unaffordable, as I think he knows and accepts. We put the new hospital programme on a sustainable footing with a timeline that can be met. We're not prepared to trade on false promises as they did, and obviously we put record investment into the NHS. But I do just gently urge him to one day get a bit more serious about the funding of these measures, because every week he comes here to basically push me on two issues: to spend a lot more money, but at the same time in the next breath opposing the measures in the budget to raise the money that's necessary.
Sir Ed Davey.
Mr Speaker, unlike the Prime Minister, we had a funded programme at the election, and I'm disappointed with his reply. And I hope he'll actually visit some of these hospitals to see the urgent need for rebuilding. Mr Speaker, at Merton Mead Farm in Oxfordshire last week, I saw world-class British beef farmers at work. Farmers want him to be careful in any trade deal with President Trump. They were let down by the Conservatives' appalling trade deals and worried that a bad US deal could see American agribusiness undercut them with inferior meat. So will the Prime Minister guarantee a vote in this House on any trade deal that he agrees with the United States?
Well, he raises a really important point of real interest and importance to farmers. We will negotiate, as he would expect, in the national interest and uphold the highest animal welfare standards. We are making progress on that, and then there'll be a process if a deal is reached.
Catherine Atkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This time last year, train manufacturing at Alstom in Derby was grinding to a halt. On a single day, workers with a combined welding experience of nearly 1,000 years walked out of its doors. But the whole city came together with crucial backing from this Prime Minister. And what a difference a year makes. with Alstom saved and set to host the greatest gathering to celebrate 200 years of rail and our railways coming back into public ownership with the headquarters of Great British Railways in Derby, will the Prime Minister agree that with Labour we are back on track?
Mr. Speaker, she's a fantastic champion for Derby. She's right, whether it's the workforce I met at Alstom or the workers at Hitachi in County Durham, we will support our rail industry, providing certainty that delivers jobs, investment and security for them. I met these workforces. I know how worried they were a year ago, she rightly says, when this government was in charge. I'm really proud that Derby will be the home of Great British Railways, because we're bringing railways back into public ownership, delivering better services for passengers, cutting delays and cancellations and boosting growth across the country.
Robin Swall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister and my party in regards to the condolences to the passing of His Holiness Pope Francis? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is often referred to his time working in Northern Ireland, and I've spoken to one of his bosses who speaks of his diligence. I wonder in that vein, could he speak to his Northern Ireland team about their understanding of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement? Because the Secretary of State in an interview seemed to think that it had been negotiated by Ian Paisley rather than David Trimble and my party. His Northern Ireland Minister has said at the start of this week that the future of Northern Ireland as part of the Union is dependent on opinion polls, and she wasn't sure if she was a unionist. Can the Prime Minister confirm to me his understanding of the principle of consent and confirm to this House that he is a unionist?
I thank him for that question, and I did work in Northern Ireland for 5 years and therefore appreciate firsthand how important these issues are. And it was a very formative period for me in terms of my career and my thinking. The Good Friday Agreement is one of the proudest achievements of the last Labour government. I pay tribute to everybody who helped bring that around, because, as he will know and other members will know, it was such an important moment in the history of the conflict, and I absolutely stand full square behind the principles, some of which I was doing my part to help implement when I was working in Northern Ireland. They will always drive me on the issues that he raises with me.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you. Happy St George's Day, Mr. Speaker, and may I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks about Pope Francis. Mr. Speaker, after 14 years of Conservative government, too many of my Middlesbrough and Thornbury East constituents live on low incomes or in real poverty. I very much welcome the employment support proposals in the Welfare Green Paper, but the government has to be clear about the real opportunities it's offering more than 3 million families who it says will lose out financially as a result of this package. So before asking MPs to vote, can he confirm that we will see fresh OBR analysis, evidence on who will be affected by the PIP changes, and the government's own assessment of the employment impact of its measures? And will he confirm that this policy will not result in increased experience of poverty?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are reforming a broken system, the system that we inherited, and I think most people accept that it needs reform because it traps people in unemployment and inactivity, and we need to reform it for that reason. The principles will be that we will provide support where support is needed. Where people do want to get into work, we will help them into work. The current system operates against people getting into work who want to make that transition, and that if you can work, you should work. Moving into work is what halves your risk of being in poverty, and that's why we've invested £1 billion in tailored employment support. And of course, we're introducing a new premium for those with the most severe lifelong disabilities who will never be able to work.
Roberts.
Last week, former steelworkers in Port Talbot watched in dismay as this government deemed their livelihoods worth less than those in Scunthorpe. FOIs reveal that the UK government doesn't know how its funding for reskilling workers in Wales is being used, or even how many people are being retrained. We know concerns have been raised by the Transition Board. If this government can't explain how it's helping Port Talbot's laid-off workers to build a future through reskilling, why shouldn't those workers then come to the logical conclusion that Labour has abandoned them?
She raised a really important issue in relation to Port Talbot. I visited a number of times and heard firsthand from the workforce there. And she may or may not know that even in opposition before the election, I was talking to the owners to try to persuade them to delay their decisions because I knew an election was coming. That's how important I thought it was. I would remind her that at the same time, the then Prime Minister refused to pick up a call to the First Minister to even discuss the issue. I took a different approach because I realised just how important it was. I would remind her, because she compares it with the decision we took last week, that the blast furnaces were turned off in January of last year, the coke ovens in March 2024, and therefore that was before the election. That was the very thing I was trying to ensure didn't happen for reasons that she and the workforce will understand, and I was talking to the workforce throughout that. What we've been able to do there since then is to negotiate an improved deal with Tata. We did that within 10 weeks. Better terms for the workers. And we're working hard to maximise opportunities from the £1.25 billion investment in electric arc furnace and supporting those with job losses with £80 million of funding to learn new skills, supply chains and protect communities. But I mean, she talks about protecting working people, but she voted against the biggest settlement, devolution settlement, since devolution. That includes more money for public services, including the NHS, and they voted against it.
Can I commend the Prime Minister and his government for the action taken so far to reform the NHS in England, making it fit for the modern day with improved technology, more GPs and appointments, and waiting lists cut for consecutive months. However, it is deeply unfortunate that in Scotland we have an SNP government that has made the political choice to waste taxpayers' money on vanity projects, flawed legislation and failed court cases rather than focus on improving our health service. Does he agree with me that the people of Airdrie and Shotts, who have been promised a new hospital for almost a decade, deserve far better than suffering and pain on waiting lists and receiving treatment in crumbling buildings as a direct consequence of SNP incompetence?
My honourable friend is a real champion for Airdrie and Shotts. And over 60,000 Scots have been stuck waiting for tests or treatments for over a year. That's a 46% rise in 1 year. And yet almost 50,000 fewer operations have been carried out compared with before the pandemic. And compare what the SNP are doing with what we're doing here in England. We've driven down waiting lists within 6 months. 6 months' worth of reductions in a row with over 3 million extra appointments. Scotland's NHS urgently needs change, but the SNP has no strategy, no plan and absolutely no ideas.
Dr. Neil Shastry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The danger posed by China to our national security is self-evident. So can the Prime Minister explain why he and his government have chosen to treat Beijing as a business partner and not as the hostile state that it truly is?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've set out our approach to China a number of times. It's not materially different to the approach of the last government in the last years of the last government, I might just add. And in relation to Scunthorpe, of course, the deal that we had to deal with during recess was the deal negotiated by the last government. We've taken sensible decisions in the national interest and will continue to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Prime Minister will join me in celebrating the opening of the new Brixton Blood Donation Centre in my constituency, which in 3 months has seen over 3,700 people donate, over 1,000 of them first-timers and 10% of them black. However, with sickle cell anaemia, the fastest growing genetic condition in the UK, this is not enough. Demand for the RO blood subtype more common in people of African descent, is rising 10 to 15% annually and is crucial for treating sickle cell. Rules around travel as well as inaccurate iron tests are seeing willing black donors turned away for 4 to 12 months. Of course, blood donation must be safe, but failure to review these guidelines is costing lives. So will the Prime Minister commit to reviewing these rules and join me in calling on you, Mr Speaker, to help us all play our part by facilitating a biannual blood drive in Parliament?
Well, I'll leave that to you, Mr Speaker. I think it's from me to suggest that you donate your blood. Well, I'm sure you do, and we can support this jointly. And actually, across the House, we should take that up under your leadership, Mr Speaker. But let me join her in welcoming the new Brixton Blood Donor Centre and the life-saving support that it provides. Increasing donor diversity is a priority for the NHS, and we're working to increase raw blood donations by engaging with communities who are more likely to have this blood type. And I'll make sure that she meets the relevant health minister to discuss what more we can do in this area.
Sir David Davis.
British governments of all political persuasions have long taken pride in reducing the carbon footprint of British manufacturing industry. Unfortunately, in too many cases, and too much of it, of this so-called reduction has been achieved by driving British industry abroad to other countries, like China and India, that actually use more carbon to produce the same product. British steel is just the latest of this, which is bad for the global environment and also disastrous for the British economy. And this is against a background of European carbon policies that have failed over 20 years. So does the Prime Minister have a new domestic British policy which will protect British industry from this long-term disastrous trend?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr Speaker, we are doing everything available to us to protect car building in this country, and he will have noticed that 2 weeks ago I made announcements about the Z mandate and what more we could do to support the industry at the moment. That was an immediate response to circumstances as they were, but I indicated at the time, and I do so again, that we will do whatever it takes to support our car industry.
Mr
Speaker, my constituent Billy spent months trying to see a GP to investigate his symptoms. It took 4 months of telephone appointments before we finally got seen in person and actually got the tests that diagnosed stage 4 cancer. A delay in diagnosis which has dramatically changed his prognosis. And as someone who's become a friend, it hurts me to see the pain he is now living in. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that primary care is a vital part of the healthcare system and we need wider access to both in-person appointments and to telephone ones?
Well, I'm deeply sorry to hear about Billy's case, and I'm sure the whole House is. And our focus has to be on making sure GPs spend more time caring for patients. And that includes the investment of an additional £889 million into general practice in England, and putting over 1,500 GPs into surgeries since October. We did deliver a record settlement for Scotland's public services to help fix our NHS and ensure people like Billy get the care that they deserve.
John Blair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through the ages, an innovative and vibrant City of London has underpinned investment and growth in the wider economy. But the main challenge the city currently faces is how to get more capital into capital markets. Now, I believe, and many believe, that London can gain new momentum if the government takes bold action to challenge and empower those who steward our pension assets to do things in new ways. So I ask the Prime Minister, following the decision of the Chancellor to offer continuity of leadership at the FCA, will he convene an urgent number 10 summit with city leaders and the regulators to reset and to maximise the chances that the city can lead economic growth and recovery in these times of grave uncertainty and turmoil?
Well, he's right that we need to go further and faster in terms of kick-starting growth, attracting the investment we need to create jobs, and our regulators must regulate for growth and not just for risk. And We do want that continuity of leadership that he mentions, and we are convening and getting people together to drive that growth, and we'll take away the ideas that he puts on the table.
Alison Hoon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Proposed changes to personal independence payments mean that people who require various levels of support due to lifelong conditions such as learning disabilities will not meet the new eligibility criteria. However, the Green Paper introduces a group of people with lifelong conditions who will not be subject to reassessment. Can the Prime Minister confirm that people with a learning disability, which is a lifelong condition that will not change, will be included in the group of claimants who will not be subjected to repeated reassessments?
Right, thank her for her question. I know this means a lot to her. We're clear on the principles for reform, protecting those with the most severe disabilities who will never be able to work, as she references, and making sure people with the most severe disabilities and health conditions will never face the prospect of being constantly reassessed again. We are making sure that extra financial support is based on the impact of health condition or disability, not the capacity to work, and I can reassure her we're carefully considering options for transitional protection.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. His Chancellor's economic policies started off badly and have headed rapidly downhill from there. His Energy Secretary's policies ensure that energy-rich Scotland lives under the highest domestic and commercial energy prices in the world, and his Foreign Secretary provides diplomatic cover for the atrocities committed in Gaza by the IDF, to the horror of the people of Scotland. This is just one, but he is the incompetent-in-chief who refuses to bring his ministers into line. Just one of the reasons that independence enjoys an 11-point lead over remaining in this dysfunctional, broken Brexit Britain. Does he understand why the people of Scotland are so dissatisfied with the latest iteration of dysfunctional British rule in Scotland?
Does he understand the electorate in Scotland answered that question in July of last year? I remember there used to be quite a few of them sitting around here. Now it's a distant cry from up there.
Final question, Zara Sultan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, humanitarian law organisations applied for an arrest warrant for Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar over alleged war crimes in Gaza, including the siege of Kamal Adwan Hospital and the torture of its director, Dr. Hussam Abu Safia. Yet the red carpet was rolled out. Saar has justified blocking vital humanitarian aid into Gaza, backed the illegal annexation of Palestinian land, and rejected a Palestinian state. The Prime Minister is a human rights lawyer, so surely he knows that the UK has a legal duty to uphold international law. Why then did he block the arrest of an unindicted war criminal?
I didn't.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's questions.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Sir John Hayes.
Mr. Speaker, you, like me, have long been a supporter of Britain's nuclear test veterans. So I wonder if you could advise me, given that government lawyers have finally admitted, after 73 years of denial, that tests may have taken place at the time that those veterans were in the South Atlantic. The government lawyers say information may have been recorded by scientists carrying out radiation monitoring. This surely requires a statement in the House by a government minister, Mr. Speaker, and I wonder how I can facilitate that.
I don't think I even need to answer that, as a man who does know how to facilitate, and I know that it won't end here. What I would say is, I know it's not a point of order, Chair, and I'm not carrying on questions, but I would say is he's certainly got on the record, and I know he will now pursue in many ways that are available to him. Right, let me come to presentation of Bill Daisy Cooper.
Chalk Streams Sewerage Investment Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 11th of July, Mr. Speaker.
Friday the 11th of July. Okay. Right. We now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Ben Bassajecki.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the Secretary of State to prepare and publish a strategy for tackling interpersonal abuse and violence against men and boys and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, this Labour government has pledged to halve instances of violence against women and girls, an intent that I have no doubt both sides of this House are fully able to support. The aim of this bill is to tackle an aspect of that current violence against women and girls strategy, an aspect that makes no sense and one that is essential is addressed by the government. The violence against women and girls strategy currently includes male victims of violence against women and girls. The government still defines violence against women and girls, or VAUG, as a category of crimes which disproportionately affects women. Therefore, all victims of crimes such as domestic abuse, rape, sexual assault, digital image abuse, forced marriage and honour-based violence, including men and boys, are considered victims of VAUG. I would like to make clear, this bill in no way detracts from the work already done and still to be done in tackling violence against women and girls. This bill is simply to ensure that male victims of those crimes have a dedicated strategy that reflects the differing nature of their circumstances and ensures that male survivors are recognised and receive appropriate support. The current miscategorisation forces male victims into spaces and discussions which may be more appropriately reserved for women. At present, the government has no dedicated strategy to tackling interpersonal abuse and violence against men and boys. In 2019, the previous government published its first ever position statement on male victims and followed this in 2022 with a subsequent addendum on supporting male victims. The change in government and a revised strategy on violence against women and girls presents a new opportunity to devise a parallel strategy for violence against men and boys in lieu of any direction from the government regarding the publication of a new, updated position statement. The Minister for Safeguarding is, as I understand it, currently in the process of rewriting the violence against women and girls strategy for publication later this spring. And to that end, now is the time to legislate for such a change to be formalised. It should be noted that when the government states that it hopes to halve violence against women and girls, the start date for that data currently includes victims who are men and boys. Victims of gender-based violence face many barriers which prevent them from reporting instances of abuse. There is the fear of not being believed. There is the threat that the perpetrator may still pose. The simple fact of not being aware of the services available to help or being aware and not being able to access them. There are too the complexities around the consequences of disclosure, the impact of living arrangements or financial security, and how this can, in turn, lead to instances of coercive control. For men and boys, however, there are additional factors. The shame and stigma of not appearing to be masculine, of being vulnerable, of potentially having your sexuality outed, of being the victim of a crime considered and officially referred to as one which applies to female victims. The majority of men seeking help are those who have coped alone, often for long periods, and are still living with their abusive partners. In these circumstances, those men may need help with housing and finances, and in circumstances also involving dependent children, how they can still maintain their role as a father. Safety planning for this group of men must be initiated at the point of disclosure, as a majority of those seeking help don't return to those providing it following first contact. The Crime Survey for England and Wales, year ending September 2024, showed that 3% of men aged 16 and over were victims of domestic abuse between September 2023 and September 2024, compared to 6.6% of women. According to Women's Aid's 2025 annual audit report, as of May 2024, there were just 50 refuges in England with bed spaces for men. As such, of a total of 63,950 people supported in safe accommodation in that period, only 1,830 were men. There is also a difference in the needs of men who are gay, bisexual or trans. Owing to the complexities of the nature of these relationships, the risk of being outed, of being the victim of prejudice or being disowned by family members, male victims are less likely to report domestic abuse to statutory services. Carlisle and Withers' 2023 survey highlighted that over 70% of gay, bisexual and trans male victims of domestic abuse had never sought support from a statutory service provider.
Their statistics are therefore not recorded in any official figures, and as a result, these victims find themselves further isolated, increasing their vulnerability to abuse. Sexual abuse against men is a vastly underreported crime. 1 in 4 adults sexually assaulted in the UK each year is a man. 1 in 10 rapes and 1 in 7 sexual assaults have male victims, according to the Office for National Statistics. 3.5% of boys become victims of child sexual abuse before they turn 16. 1 in 4 victims of child sexual abuse are men. Over 70% of child sex abusers are people known to their victims. Shame, stigma, homophobia, emasculation are all factors in preventing sexual abuse from being reported, and it can often take years for a male victim to report a sexual assault to the police. Male sexual assault survivors are 3 times more likely to tell a family member, friend or colleague than they are to report an incident to the police. ONS data suggests that fewer than a third of male victims of sexual assault have ever disclosed what they have experienced. For straight men, there can also be a hesitancy to disclose abuse, owing to a misconception that men should be physically strong enough to prevent an assault. Male victims of abuse who have been forced to penetrate by a partner can struggle to identify their experience as abuse because it has caused them to be aroused. Rape and sexual abuse should never be minimised because the perpetrator is female. The law currently states that whilst males and females can be the victim of rape, only males can realistically commit the act of rape. The introduction of a forced to penetrate sexual offence could therefore address this. Honour-based violence is another factor poorly understood and catered for. Victims of honour-based violence are at greater risk of repeat victimisation and are often at risk from multiple perpetrators, but there is no discrete crime of so-called honour-based violence or abuse defined in our legislation, and so in most instances, male victims will be classified by police as victims of violence without injury or stalking and harassment. Data from the Crown Prosecution Service suggests that around 30% of prosecutions for honour-based violence involve male victims. Additionally, the Forced Marriage Unit has consistently seen that 20% of forced marriage victims are male, and this can often include men from overseas who are forced to marry UK citizens and can find themselves forced into domestic servitude, thus also becoming victims of modern slavery. This time last year, research undertaken by Emeritus Professor Nicola Graham-Kevan of the University of Lancashire published data on how male survivors feel about being categorised as victims of violence against women and girls. 89% stated that it made it harder to seek help. 89% stated that they experienced distress. 88% stated that the government does not care. 80% stated that it was minimising their experiences. 75% stated that it wasn't taken seriously. 73% stated that it wasn't recognised by society. It is clear that the damaging impact of including male victims within a strategy that caters for violence against women and girls means that male survivors cannot identify with that labelling. Organisations such as We Are Survivors, the Men and Boys Coalition, Mankind Initiative have been instrumental in providing support for male victims and advocating for a solution to this issue, and I thank them for the work they have done to highlight this inequality. Last November, the Victims Commissioner, Baroness Helen Newlove, wrote to the Safeguarding Minister outlining many of the same concerns as I have highlighted here. These concerns are not unique. They are shared by the male survivors community. The view of the Victims Commissioner should not go unheeded, nor that of her predecessor, Dame Vera Baird-Casey, who expressed similar views. The purpose of this bill is echoed in those words. I believe it is beyond time for a dedicated men and boys strategy with specific policies, strategic milestones and accompanying funding. A tailored approach for male victims of interpersonal violence is essential to developing their rights and ensuring the ability of appropriate support services. I urge you to seize this opportunity to create both a robust cross-governmental VORG strategy and a separate, comprehensive strategy for men and boys, with clear policies, strategic targets, milestones and sustainable funding arrangements. 6 months later, and with nothing further heard on implementing such a strategy, this bill has been required in order to push the Safeguarding Minister into taking action. My hope is that male survivors of such traumatic violence and abuse can finally be given the focus their plight deserves. I also hope the members on both sides of the House feel that they can support what this bill sets out to achieve, and I thank them all for their time in listening this afternoon.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare to bring in the bill?
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, Sir Roger Gale, Sir Ashley Fox, Charlie Dewhurst, Wendy Morton, David Simmons, Paul Holmes, Rebecca Smith, Bob Blackman, Alison Griffiths, Richard Holden and myself, Mr Speaker.
Bene Besigetti.
Interpersonal abuse and violence against men and boys strategy bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, 16th of May.
Friday, the 16th of May. Well done, Ben. Right. We now come to the motion in the name of the Leader of the Liberal Democratic Party on hospitals. Inform the House that I have selected the amendment tabled in the name of the Prime Minister. I now call Helen Morgan to move the motion.
The state of our hospital buildings is a national scandal. Everybody in this country should be in control of their own lives and their own health. And that means everybody should get the care they need, when they need it, and where they need it. But that can never be realised while so many patients are treated in settings that are grossly inadequate. From Shropshire to Cornwall to Cambridgeshire, Watford and Devon, patients are losing their dignity because of decisions taken by the Conservatives and the current Labour government's failure to rectify them. The Conservatives' record is one of starved repair budgets, sewage leaks, crumbling ceilings and bucket-strewn wards. It's an outrage that millions of people are waiting for treatment, and yet overcrowded hospitals have had to close operating theatres because they are no longer fit for use. Patients and the staff who work in hospitals deserve the dignity of safe, modern and clean environments. But instead, the last government shamefully chose to raid the repair budget to plug the gap in day-to-day costs as our hospitals fell apart. And now the new government, having been elected on what is increasingly looking like false hope, is pursuing a false economy by delaying the desperately needed new hospitals programme. Like so much of its agenda, having promised so much, the government is delivering so little and betraying those who put their faith in the Labour Party. Farmers who were fed up with the Tories, who took them for granted, have been hit by a tax grab on their families' futures. Employers who were promised growth and no new taxes have been whacked by an increase in national insurance, and patients who were promised new hospitals have had them taken away from them. I will give way.
I was with her almost up until the point that I congratulate on this debate. It's absolutely true that the new hospitals programme was not new hospitals and it was unfunded under the Tories. But it is being funded now under Labour, and I'm seeing, in the case of my hospitals, the Imperial Hospitals Trust, that money is being invested in that, and we're preparing for the major rebuilds of those. So perhaps you will give a little bit of credit to what the new government has done, as well as correctly identifying the shambles that we were left in.
I thank him for his intervention. He'll be aware that there weren't 40 new hospitals, they weren't all hospitals, and there weren't 40 of them. But the issue we have here is that the start dates for many of the hospitals that urgently need rebuilding have been pushed back into the 2030s, long beyond the life of this Parliament. And the people who are served by those hospitals were promised new facilities, and they haven't had them, and that's devastating for those communities. So, if the Conservative approach was contemptible, Labour's approach has been to procrastinate. The cost to the NHS of papering over the cracks and keeping hospitals running past their natural lifespan is enormous. That's why the government must reverse the delay to the new hospital programme at once and urgently deliver the new hospitals that patients have long been promised. I will give way.
Honourable Member. I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. I wonder if she can explain to me how spending £22 billion extra on the National Health Service this year can in any way be described as procrastination.
It's important to recognise that the additional investment in the NHS, if you look at the numbers from the ABR, and I'm sure the gentleman has, it amounts to about £10 billion a year. Because of the cost of the national insurance hikes and the cost of compensating other public sector employers for those hikes. So the £22 billion is somewhat misleading. And the point that we are trying to make is that it is a false economy to keep these buildings going with a crumbling estate, to keep repairing them, patching them up, putting a sticking plaster on those problems, when those buildings need to be demolished and rebuilt, it's a false economy. It would be much better to build them up front and save those repair costs in the future. So we need to ensure that no one is treated in broken, uncomfortable and unsafe facilities. Repairing and replacing, as I've just said, crumbling substandard hospitals is not only vital for delivering better care and treating more patients, it's crucial for rebuilding the economy after years of economic vandalism. So how much does all this cost? In my county of Shropshire, the cost of the maintenance backlog across all the sites has reached about £75 million. And I'm sure everyone here would agree that £75 million is a lot of money. Indeed, it's so much that it's the total amount of capital investment the government has given for hospices this year. But in terms of hospital maintenance, it's a drop in the ocean. Hospitals like Torbay need more than 50 million to clear the backlog. Hospitals like Watford have a backlog of 63 million, I will in a moment, while Hull Royal Infirmary requires an eye-watering £70 million. Across England, the figure is a colossal £13.8 billion, and that is just to bring our existing hospital estate up to a minimum standard. And I'll give way to the gentleman.
The honourable member is, of course, right that there is a huge amount of money needs to be spent, and a lot of that money goes back to the fact that in the 2010s, as Lord Darcy tells us, £37 billion less was spent on hospital buildings than should have been spent. Could you perhaps remind me who was in government in the first half of the 2010s?
Helen Morgan.
The honourable gentleman will be aware that there has been, that when you come into government and have to clean up the mess left behind by the previous government, you have to make some very difficult choices, and it is the job of the opposition to point out where they would make those choices and where they would do take different options. We would invest to save money in the long run rather than frittering money away on a repair bill for buildings that need to be demolished. It is not sensible to pour good money after bad when the right thing to do is invest in the new estate, invest in a fit-for-purpose, modern estate that doesn't have these endless and extortionate maintenance requirements every single year. I'm going to make some progress, if that's okay. So, at North Devon District Hospital, the ducting of the ventilation system that serves the operating theatres hasn't been changed since it was installed in 1979 and can't be replaced due to the ceiling height and the asbestos that's present there. As a result, all operating theatres have been non-compliant with NHS England buildings guidance since 2007. Now, the good people of Devon clearly need a new hospital. They were promised they would have this by 2030, only for the Labour government to take this away and decide the change they need won't be delivered for another decade. Even hospitals with comparatively few maintenance problems, like Royal Shrewsbury Hospital, which serves my constituents, with its £35 million backlog, are clearly a long way short of being up to standard. Now, I'm not going to go into detail again today about the catalogue of issues in Shropshire, the ambulance delays, the ambulance station closures, the waiting times for check-ups, scans and surgeries, the substandard state of cancer care. But all this is combining to put huge pressure on hospitals where both the staff and the buildings are straining under the load.
Mr Speaker, can I commend the Honourable Lady and the opposition Lib Dem party for bringing this forward? It's very important. One of the issues that the Honourable Lady and the party haven't mentioned in their notice of motion is the issue of car parking. It is a continual problem. Those who can't get car parking spaces close to the hospital, those who are disabled, those who are going for appointments which are then delayed or missed. So does the Honourable Lady agree when it comes to addressing the issue that the party is setting out very clearly what needs to be done? Car parking has to be central to that as well.
Intervention. Obviously, car parking is a real problem, particularly where public transport is poor, something that plagues my constituents, and when it's unrealistically expensive for people who need to use the hospital facilities. So I thank him for that point. The point of the NHS crisis is that it impacts on patient outcomes. So patients like my constituent Emma was left in the fit-to-sit area for 48 hours despite having been diagnosed with suspected sepsis. 96-year-old Mary waited in an ambulance outside for 11 hours. An 82-year-old Paula spent 24 hours in a trolley, on a trolley in a corridor. And this is the reality of hospitals up and down the country. I think we are all agreed that that is a disgrace and it needs to be rectified. I'm going to make some progress, if that's okay for the moment. One of the main reasons these problems haven't been rectified is successive delays from successive governments. And again, Shropshire is a prime example. So, not related to the new hospital programme, but nonetheless, £312 million was granted for the hospital transformation programme in Shropshire back in 2018. 7 years later, and while the county has been through 5 prime ministers and 8 different health secretaries, Shropshire is still waiting for that transformation to take place. There's been opposition from both the Labour and Conservative councils that serve the area, along with a ridiculously lengthy process that capital expenditure has to go through to be signed off. Desperately needed improvements have been horribly delayed as construction costs rise, and as a result, the original plans are scaled back and their value diminished.
On that point,
I'll give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. She mentions the inordinate delays that occur for the application for capital funds. I have watched with horror as my local hospital trust in West Hertfordshire have had to submit business case after business case after business case after business case, watching the costs rack up. Would she agree with me that one of the ways that we can actually spend the allocated money more efficiently is actually to devolve those budgets to local hospital trusts rather than having a centralised programme that drives up the costs?
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with my honourable friend, actually, because that's exactly the situation we saw in Shropshire. And once again, the people that will suffer because of that are the patients. So, last year, less than £900 million of the £13.8 billion required to eradicate repair backlogs at hospitals was invested. That's just 6.5%. And you don't need to be an accountant to work out that at that rate it will take 15 years to clear the current backlog, let alone deal with the further deterioration of these crumbling buildings, as we have already discussed. Indeed, investment in eradicating the repair backlog has fallen sharply from £1.4 billion in 2021 to £895 million in 2023-24, a fall of 37%. And I'm afraid, just like the approach to fixing social care, the government's continued lack of imagination and ambition is leaving our NHS less productive and less stable, and risks leaving millions languishing on NHS waiting lists. I think I'm going to give way to the honourable gentleman there, actually, because he...
Most grateful for delayed response. Thank you so much. Most grateful, Honourable Lady. I'm very struck by her lack of response to 2 of my colleagues. One, not acknowledging that in my constituency, Chelsea and Fulham, Imperial College NHS Trust is getting money from the government as a precursor to rebuilding the hospitals promised to it. But more importantly, not addressing the point made by my honourable friend for Calder Valley, which is that we here are all reaping the whirlwind of the decisions taken by the Conservative Liberal Democrat government. There was a choice made. Liberal Democrats made the choice to go in and be the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, be health ministers, to make the cuts and destroy the NHS, and we are now reaping the whirlwind of the decision that she and her colleagues made. And is it not just a little bit cheeky of her to come here and make some of the points and claims she is making today?
Yeah. Morgan.
Well, I'm pleased that his hospital is being dealt with. I'm sure the residents of Torbay won't feel the benefit of that. And I'm also slightly surprised that he thinks that the decade since the Liberal Democrats were in power has had no impact whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly.
And I did absolutely address the point that when you come into government having to clear up an appalling mess from the previous government, there are difficult choices to be made. His party knows that. They have voted, for example, to retain the 2-child benefit cap and keep 250,000 children in poverty, something in my party no one in my party has ever voted for. Yeah. So, just like its approach to fixing social care, the government's continued lack of imagination and ambition is leaving the NHS less productive and less stable, and risks leaving millions languishing on NHS waiting lists, as I said. Now, the last time I opened a Liberal Democrat Opposition Day debate, it was October, and the topic was primary care. I explained how the government's failure to invest in primary care was a false economy that increased pressures and costs in the critical parts of the system. And that same false economy is in place with the management of our hospital buildings. Just as spending money on critical care instead of prevention and public health is a poor approach to managing a health service, waiting for the roof to collapse is an irresponsible way to manage NHS buildings. And as problems are ignored and investment is poorly targeted, it is patients and the hard-working staff striving to help them who are forced to suffer. And it's not only the new hospital programme. Across the country, there are thousands of GP surgeries that need urgent improvement if they are to provide the care that patients deserve. More than 2,000 hospital buildings across England were built before the foundation of the NHS in 1948, while the state of GP surgeries varies wildly as well. Many surgeries are simply no longer fit for purpose, having been built in the 50s. Prescott Surgery in my constituency, for example, has long been recognised as somewhere that needs to drastically increase in size because the population of the village has increased drastically itself. And despite the land and the SIL funding being available, there is no sign of a new surgery being built, and the delay continues. The costs are rising, and the challenge grows for both the Council and the Integrated Care Board that are already under immense pressure to cut their costs. So instead of pursuing fantasies like the Conservatives or false economies like the Labour Party, Liberal Democrats would invest to save by starting construction now and ending the epidemic of cancelled operations, closed off wards, and huge sums wasted on emergency repairs. This will save the taxpayer money in the long run and benefit patients much sooner. I walk away.
And
well,
this
she's being a little bit unrealistic. We have 3 world-class hospitals, Charing Cross, Hammersmith and St Mary's Paddington. The repair bill is £874 million. The rebuild and new build cost is £4 billion. Yes, we are refurbishing parts of Charing Cross. Yes, we are putting a lot of investment into preparing for that work. But the idea that suddenly she's going to come up with tens or if not hundreds of billions of pounds is just unrealistic, isn't it?
The plan that we've put forward involves £10 billion over 10 years, and I will come on to that in a moment. The real issue here is that we can't pick one hospital and say that that is indicative of an NHS which is being dealt with appropriately. Right. There are hospitals across the country that are falling apart. There are hospitals like Stepping Hill in the constituency of my honourable friend that isn't even in the new hospital building programme and yet is falling apart at the seams. Right. And we need to address the whole estate fairly urgently, I would suggest. So, our 10-year guaranteed capital investment programme would provide long-term security and fix the crumbling hospitals and creaking GP surgeries. It would provide an extra £10 billion for our crumbling buildings over the next decade, improving outcomes for patients, boosting productivity and cutting day-to-day costs for the NHS. And the certainty is crucial. As it stands, managers have to raid precious budgets, not just to plug leaking pipes, but to plug staffing gaps when winter pressure arrives. That's why we would also end the reactive approach to the annual winter crisis through our winter task force. Instead of the average £376 million of emergency funding announced late into the winter each year for the last 7 years, our winter task force would manage a ring-fenced fund of £1.5 billion over the next 4 years. This would help hospitals to plan their budgets and build resilience in wards, A&E departments, ambulance services and patient discharging. We're also campaigning... I'm walking away.
Thank you. I thank the honourable member for giving way. We talk about the day-to-day budgets of the NHS, in particular the costs of paying off previous debts, and we talked about the coalition years and the work that needed to be done in those, and the decade and a half since, after members opposite keep making interventions. Does the honourable member agree with me that actually one of the biggest messes that needed to be cleared up then, and is still being felt now in NHS budgets, is the disastrous PFI finances of the Blair and Brown years?
Helen Morgan.
Well, I think there are successive failures in NHS management that I think all parties need to hold their hands up to. I think that's a fair point. I think, though, that we should be focusing on the task in hand rather than continually going back decades either to the coalition government or indeed the Blair government before that. It isn't helpful to our constituents. They want to see a solution now. Now, I've been very generous with my time and I'm going to make some progress. So we're campaigning also for a review of outdated government finance rules which prevent NHS trusts from investing the funds they've raised into their own buildings. Even NHS managers struggle to access the common sense investment in their facilities due to overly complex rules and glacial processes. Trusts are prevented from using unspent funds on improving their buildings. We need root and branch reform combined with this 10-year programme of investment to bring our local health facilities up to scratch. So in conclusion, Mr Speaker, the recent history of the NHS is one of short-term decision-making and of the failure of successive governments to grasp the nettle of long-term sustained investment in the things that matter. Things like hospital buildings, things like GP services, dentistry and pharmacy, and crucially, things like social care, the unspoken crisis. The outcome is an organisation spending millions of pounds and going backwards. It truly is a false economy. This government has spoken warmly of the need to reform the NHS and improve productivity, and we support them in that. But you can't expect to retain staff and provide high-quality care when so many doctors and nurses are negotiating leaking roofs and sewage backing up on the ward. Dealing with the new hospitals programme is a matter of urgency, and I urge the Secretary of State to, at long last, grasp this nettle.
The question is, as on the order paper, Mr Kinnock, is it? I call Stephen Kinnock to move the amendment. I've got a different name down now on them.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. I'm glad you recognise me from the chair. I've lost some hair since we last spoke, and I beg to move the amendment that's on the order paper in the name of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister. I want to thank the Liberal Democrats for using their opposition day to address a matter of vital importance for so many members, including many colleagues right across the chamber and, of course, their constituents. I sincerely hope that they will work with us on solutions, not on sound bites, because we do need to be realistic about the problems we're facing and serious about how we tackle them. Mr Speaker, the new hospital programme was announced by the last government to much fanfare in October 2020, and with a promise to deliver 40 new hospitals by 2030. We were told that there was a plan and a timetable, and we were glibly assured that it was fully funded. But from the outset, it was clear that there were not 40 new schemes, and some were just refurbishments or extensions. To put it simply, there were not 40 projects, they were not all new, and many of them weren't even hospitals. Now, the spin around the programme was widely questioned and challenged before the general election. But nevertheless, we were truly shocked by what we found on entering the Department for Health and Social Care. The programme was hugely delayed by several years more than had already been revealed by the National Audit Office. There was no credible plan to deliver these building projects, let alone deliver them all in the next 5 years. And there was not even enough construction capacity in the UK to build all the hospitals in the new hospital programme by 2030. Which is why when the RAC hospitals were brought into the NHP in 2023, even the last government had the sense to admit that 9 schemes would have to be delivered past 2030 to prioritise the RAC hospitals. And perhaps most shocking of all, the funding for the programme was due to run out a month ago, with no provision for future years whatsoever. The money simply wasn't there, and the programme was built on nothing more than false hope, dodgy claims and disingenuous press releases. I will, good point.
I thank the Minister. I mean, will he share with me my constituents' anger at the failure of the Tories to back up any of their promises about new hospitals and reassure me that the constituents who are served by Airedale General Hospital will finally get a new hospital to deal with the RAC that's an affordable, deliverable timetable, unlike the false promises of the party opposite. Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. She's a doughty champion of her constituents. She's absolutely right, and I think the point she makes actually raises something even bigger than this, which is about trust in politics and trust that her constituents have in this place. And that trust is fundamentally undermined by the disingenuous nature of what went on with this previous hospital programme. And I think the British people are grown up enough for us to be able to level with them and be straight with them and say this is credible, this is affordable, it's based on facts, not on fantasy. And I will.
for giving way. On the point about trust, the Conservatives completely blew trust with the constituents of West Hertfordshire because they promised a new hospital. They even said in 2023 that it was going to be fully funded, and it clearly wasn't. But in the most recent general election, the Labour Party did promise that Watford General Hospital would be a priority. Can the Minister now make a new promise to keep that trust by promising to come and visit Watford General Hospital this year?
Well, I thank her for that intervention, and I'm sure she will appreciate the fact that we've now come forward with a programme that's not built on sand or smoke and mirrors. It's actually built on reality, and of course her hospital in her constituency will be a part of that. And of course she'd be very welcome to write to me with any further representations that she might want to make. That, Mr. Speaker, is the dog's breakfast that we inherited from the party opposite. And this is genuinely not a partisan point, because when the government does the right thing, for example on the tobacco and vapes bill, we are more than happy to support. But where they failed, fibbed and fobbed off members of this House, we will not pretend that they were acting in good faith. And now it falls to us to level with the British people about why their hospitals will not be fixed on time. And our constituents are understandably furious, because our National Health Service is quite literally crumbling. As Lord Darcy found in his investigation, over the past 14 years, our NHS has been starved of capital, with a staggering £37 billion underinvestment over the course of the 2010s. So I know today that we will hear from honourable members about many examples of hospital roofs falling, leaky pipes that freeze over in the winter, and buckets catching rainwater in corridors. And I know that capital spending is needed now more than ever. But, Mr. Speaker, whilst we are deeply shocked by the neglect and incompetence of the party opposite, this has not prevented us from rolling up our sleeves and clearing up the mess that they left behind. Which is why we have immediately commissioned a review, or why we immediately commissioned a review which had two core objectives. First, to put the programme on a firm footing with sustainable funding, so that all the projects can be delivered to a realistic and affordable timetable. And second, to give patients a realistic, deliverable timetable that is based on facts rather than fantasy.
I thank my friend for giving way. He talks about realistic timeline. I think that's really important. My constituent in Harlow were promised a new hospital when clearly there was no money, there was no business plan, and there wasn't even the site made available for the new hospital. So would he agree with me that this is so important for the trust that we want to get from our constituents, certainly Harlow, we have a realistic time plan that we can actually meet?
Well, I thank him, and he's also a doughty champion for his constituents. We have to recognise that with each brick that we build in the new hospital programme, I hope that we'll start to rebuild some trust with his constituents and between his constituents and this place. And I think he's absolutely right to point out that it's much better to have a realistic programme rather than one that is built on smoke and mirrors. Now, officials reported on the review in the autumn and set out a range of options for a more realistic timetable for delivery. And in January, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, announced a 5-year waves of investment, backed up by up to £15 billion of investment over consecutive 5-year waves, averaging £3 billion a year from 2030. Our programme is a balanced portfolio of hospital schemes at different development stages, being delivered now and into the future. It's the most efficient and cost-effective way of giving our NHS the buildings it needs, whilst also giving the construction sector the certainty that it needs to deliver.
He refers to the capital needs of the NHS as a whole, and as my honourable friend mentioned earlier, that applies to many GP surgeries too. In my constituency of Bicester and Woodstock, where we have rapid growth in populations in Woodstock and Hayford Park and Bicester are struggling, where GPs want to expand but cannot access the money to do so. So will the Minister look with urgency at releasing more funds through ICBs so that future revenue can be provided to allow for the capital investment that will give my constituents an expansion in GP surgeries and take some of the pressure off our much pressurised hospitals?
Well, I thank him for that intervention. I was very pleased to see the £102 million capital investment for GP's primary care, and of course I would encourage his ICB to look very carefully at that fund and to explore the potential that it offers. I think we're also in conversation with MHCLG colleagues around ensuring that Section 106 processes are working properly, so that when there are new developments there is proper wraparound in terms of the social infrastructure that's required to make those developments sustainable. So in the space of just 9 short months, we've gone from a charade based on smoke and mirrors to a programme that is based on serious, systematic delivery.
Can I thank the Minister very much for giving way? He's setting out very articulately what this government is doing to clear up the mess around the hospital provision that this country needs. Would he agree with me that the announcement by Dartford and Gravesham NHS Trust last week that they are to build a new and expanded intensive care unit at Darrant Valley Hospital is a big step forward for Dartford residents who badly need new facilities to cope with the waiting lists and get those down, but also with the rising population of the area in Dartford?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and he's a strong campaigner for his Dartford constituents. He's absolutely right that that development is going to really be a game changer, and it's going to be really important that we now keep people's feet to the fire to really deliver on what has been promised, and I can guarantee him that he will have the full support of myself and the entire ministerial team in ensuring that that happens. So with your permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll now address the Liberal Democrat motion that's before us today. First, regarding their point about the cannibalising of NHS capital budgets to keep day-to-day services running. I'm absolutely delighted to confirm from this dispatch box that this government has drawn a line under this appalling practice, to which the party opposite was utterly addicted. That the Treasury has now new fiscal rules to prevent this from happening again, and that capital spending is safe in our hands. Secondly, on the point about reversing the so-called programme that we inherited on the 4th of July, well, I hope I've made it clear that that whole sorry mess was a work of fiction. So it's not a question of reversing anything, as they say in their motion, because there was nothing to reverse. Instead, we've gone back to the drawing board and systematically designed and built a completely new programme and a completely new approach. Regarding the...
My friend for giving way, and as somebody who had to put up with, I think it was 7 photo opportunities by previous Conservative ministers, including one sat on the opposite bench, is now coming and proclaiming that they were rebuilding Whipps Cross Hospital from money that didn't exist. It's very clear what needs reversing is the Conservative chutzpah that somehow they are the ones who are championing change on reforming PFI, because those of us who spent years trying to persuade government ministers that we could reform the disgraceful spending on PFI, particularly the PF2 schemes brought in by the previous Conservative administration, where we were seeing £2 billion a year in some trusts being spent on repayments, more than they're spending on drugs, is one of the ways where we could get some money for the new hospital. So will my honourable friend agree with me that it's this government that understands good public finances rather than the opposite benches?
Well, my honourable friend is a relentless campaigner for her constituents, and she's absolutely right that there was simply government by press release. So many aspects of policy were based on making announcements and making unfunded spending commitments. And what we discovered when we came into government was a £22 billion black hole in the public finances, largely based on promises that had absolutely no funding attached to them whatsoever. And that is the sort of behaviour that undermines trust in politics. So regarding the proposal from the Liberal Democrats to create a task force, what I would say is that we have excellent teams working on the programme and they are getting on with the job. We really don't have a second to waste, and setting up a new task force would simply mean further delay and distraction into process rather than a laser focus on delivery. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know members across the House share my outrage at the almost £14 billion backlog maintenance bill facing NHS trusts after years of historic underinvestment. I understand that many here today are concerned about the condition of the health facilities that are serving their constituents. And I wish to reassure these members that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has given us the funding to begin reversing the trend of decline started under the last government immediately. This financial year, we're backing NHS systems with over £4 billion in operational capital a life-saving cash injection of £750 million of targeted estate safety funding as a vital first step towards fixing our crumbling estate, and £440 million to tackle crumbling rack concrete, keeping staff, patients and their families safe. We are empowering systems to manage their capital allocations locally and assign funding to local priorities, ensuring money is spent as effectively as possible, as soon as possible.
Well, my local hospitals were evicted from the new hospitals programme when the RAT schemes came along. There was nothing to delay. There was no money there at all. Would the Minister now recognise that there's some very innovative schemes going on locally? So we in Imperial Healthcare Trust are pairing with Paddington Life Sciences, with Imperial College in South Kensington White City and with the Hampshire and Fulham Industrial Strategy to maximise the available resources so we can rebuild 3 world-class hospitals.
Well, I thank him. He's making some very strong points on behalf of his constituents, and we'd certainly be very happy to work more with my honourable friend around some of those innovations. What we see so often is that hospitals are anchor institutions alongside universities for driving forward innovation, harnessing the power of technology, and indeed contributing to the government's growth mission. So there's huge opportunities there, and be very happy to explore those further with him.
Despite overwhelming support, the Coventry and Warwickshire Integrated Care Board has decided to cut all beds at the Ellen Badger Hospital in Shipston-on-Stour, a community hospital at the heart of a rural town, an anchor building and community hospital. Does the Minister agree that cutting vital services like this is unacceptable, but that community hospitals play an important role in rural areas by providing equality of access to our health services?
I thank her for that intervention. She's absolutely right. Community hospitals do play a vital role, and I share her disappointment with the decisions that are being made. The fact of the matter is that we're in a hole, and we have to dig ourselves out of that hole. It's going to take some time to do that. We are getting the public finances back on an even keel. We are getting our public services back to where they need to be. We are getting the economy back on a sounder footing. And as we make those achievements, I certainly hope that we will be able to reverse some of the decisions that are being made that are, of course, damaging to her community. But we are in a very, very difficult position. It's going to take some time for us to get over that. If honourable members will just bear with me, I'll make a little bit more progress and then come back. Now, many Liberal Democrat colleagues have made the argument that with hospitals in the state they're in, it's more important than ever to have a robust social care system in place. And as the Minister of State for Care, I agree with them wholeheartedly. But it is simply not true to portray the government as sitting on its hands whilst Baroness Casey gets cracking on her vitally important work. In fact, we've hit the ground running through a plethora of measures. We have legislated for the first ever fair pay agreement for social care to tackle the 130,000 vacancies we see today. We have delivered an extra 7,800 home adaptations through the Disabled Facilities Grant to change the lives of thousands more disabled for the better. And in the budget, the Chancellor provided the biggest increase in carers allowance since the 1970s, worth £2,000 a year to family carers, with an extra £3.7 billion for local authorities. And we're not hanging around on more structural reforms either. We're introducing new standards to help people who use care, their families and providers, choose the most effective new technology as it comes on the market. We're joining up care and medical records, so NHS and care staff have the full picture they need to provide the best possible care. And training more care workers to perform more health interventions to help people stay well and at home. Mr. Speaker, just 2 weeks ago, we announced a new qualification for social care staff to train them in AI to automate routine tasks and motion sensors to detect falls. We are seizing the opportunities of care tech and harnessing it for the benefit of thousands who draw on care across our country.
To the Minister for giving way, and to start by saying we are desperate to help him in this endeavour and looking forward to receiving our invitations to the cross-party talks because they've yet to be issued. But today in front of the committee we heard from an organisation called Think Ahead, which is the only organisation in the country that trains mental health social care workers. I've just heard that DHSE is not refunding them. Can he explain why?
Well, I thank her for that intervention, and Baroness Casey is absolutely working at pace in terms of getting the Commission up and running, and that will be happening this month. We'll be launching this month. On her point about Think Ahead, I think the fundamental challenge that we have with the Think Ahead programme was its relatively high unit costs. And so what we're looking at is ensuring that we deliver value for money for the taxpayer. I'm sure that's an objective that that she would share. And we have to ensure that we deliver a programme for mental health social care work that is not only delivering the best possible outcomes for our communities, but is also delivering the best possible value for taxpayer money. So a lot has been done in the 9 months since the election, but there's a huge amount more to do. And this government is getting on with the job. Alongside this work, the government is putting record levels of investment into healthcare, with capital spending rising to £13.6 billion over this year and next. This includes £1.5 billion for new surgical hubs, diagnostic scanners and beds across the estate, and new radiotherapy machines to improve cancer treatment. Over £1 billion to tackle RAC and make inroads into the backlog of critical maintenance, repairs and upgrades across the NHS estate, and over £2 billion to be invested in NHS technology and digital. But we're also taking the pressure off our hospitals with care in the community. And I'm sure that the whole House will welcome the fact that we've recruited 1,500 extra GPs onto the front line.
Thank the Minister for giving way. Coming back to community hospitals, I came here on a basis of trying to save Teignmouth Community Hospital, which has been under threat of closure. The reason it's being closed is because Torbay, its parent hospital, has such a massive maintenance backlog. It cannot afford to maintain Teignmouth Hospital and Torbay, so it's shutting down community hospitals. In Devon, we have just 3 principal hospitals: North Devon, which we understand is under pressure, Torbay under pressure, and Exeter. We need the community hospitals as well. Will the Minister stop them from shutting Teignmouth Hospital in a way that will maintain it for when it can be rebuilt?
Well, I thank him for that intervention. Of course, these decisions are the responsibility of ICBs to take. The ICB is having to balance across a range of pressures, as he rightly points out, created largely by the neglect and incompetence of the previous government. So it is now going to have to be a question of ICBs having to cut their cloth to make the finances work with the very limited resources that they have. And I'm afraid that that is symptomatic of the mess that we found when we took over on the 4th of July.
Thank you, Minister, very much. The Royal Sussex in my constituency is in desperate need of a new cancer centre, and I'm delighted it's been added to Wave 1. I'd be even happier if the Minister could also add a new A&E department, but we'll come back to that another day. Because isn't the reality this, that we all want to build these new hospitals, but we've all got to be honest with the public about how we're going to pay for it. Yeah. And the Liberal Democrats just never are, and this motion isn't, because this is a multi-billion-pound commitment to bring forward construction dates. And all the motion talks about is creating a task force. Isn't that fundamentally unserious when this should be an incredibly serious issue that we put forward proper proposals on?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and he's an outstanding champion for his constituents. I think I did note the point he made about A&E as well. That was nicely done. He is right in what he says about the motion that's before us today, and the broader point that I would make is that thanks to the necessary decisions that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, made in the autumn budget, we have been able to generate the revenue that we are going to need to invest in rebuilding the public services, and particularly our NHS that was so brought to its knees by the previous government. And I'm afraid that I can't claim to be a very careful student of the Liberal Democrats manifesto at the last election, but But I did notice that I think their revenue-generating measures came to about £8.4 billion, which last time I checked was quite significantly lower than the £23 billion that were raised from the Chancellor's budget. So I do think the Liberal Democrats should probably get their calculators out and figure out exactly how they're going to generate this revenue, rather than criticising us constantly for the decisions that we've taken. Now, we are absolutely. I'll just make a little bit more progress if I can. We are absolutely committed to rebuilding our NHS and to rebuilding trust in government. We will never play fast and loose with the public finances, and we will never try to pull the wool over the public's eyes. Everyone in this House remembers, or should remember, that the last Labour government cut waiting lists to their lowest point in history, raised patient satisfaction to its highest levels in its history, and brought in historic health interventions like the smoking ban. But what is less remembered is that that government also delivered the largest hospital building programme in its history. All of this meant that the coalition that took over in 2010 was presented with a National Health Service that was strong and firing on all cylinders. Tragically, that coalition government and its successors set about weakening and undermining every aspect of our precious NHS, to the extent that by the time this government took over in July, it was well and truly on its knees. And so today, it once again falls to a Labour government to take the necessary and right decisions for the future. We have now put the new hospital programme on a sustainable footing, with a timeline that can be met and a budget that is consistent with our fiscal rules. That is how we have turned the programme from empty rhetoric into reality, and in doing so provided the construction industry and its supply chains with vital certainty, whilst also restoring confidence in public sector procurement. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're on the side of the builders, not the blockers. Our plan is credible, achievable and fully funded, a programme grounded in fact, not fiction. Madam Deputy Speaker, I was born in Tredegar, the very same town as Aneurin Bevan. So it's the privilege of a lifetime to be a part of a government that is carrying his torch into the 21st century and to be building a generation of hospitals that would do Nye proud. Thank you.
The original question was as on the order paper. Since when Amendment A has been proposed as on the order paper? The question is that the original words stand part of the question. I call Shadow Minister Dr Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, we can all agree that we want a world-class NHS, and that includes having the very best hospitals, technology and staff. And I have been delighted to see some of the brilliant facilities created in my own local area, including a new A&E in Boston, new mental health wards at Lincoln County Hospital, new operating theatres at Grantham and District Hospital. These upgrades mean that patients can receive the best possible care in appropriate settings, and staff can go to work each day being proud of their workplace environment. But we must be alive to the challenges that face the NHS. We live in an ageing society where people have more complex comorbidities. We also have a growing population, meaning there are more people in demand of services. In fact, the NHS treats 25% more patients every single day than it did back in 2010. New treatments, technologies and procedures have been developed, saving and improving lives with an ever more expensive price tag. And of course, we had the COVID pandemic, which I noticed that the Minister did not mention. According to the King's Fund, in 2023 prices, spending on Labour's capital in Labour's last year in office in 2009-10 was £6.9 billion. In 2023, that had nearly doubled to £11.4 billion. And even before the pandemic, capital spending was nearly £1 billion higher than when Labour left government. This helped us to open 160 community diagnostic centres and over 100 surgical hubs, investing more in scanners, beds and operating theatres to deliver 1 million more checks, scans and procedures closer to home. And we were committed to delivering the new hospital programme in full. Of course, there was more to do. The challenges were evolving, the demand for care growing and the pressure on the NHS ever increasing. It now falls to the Labour government to address these problems. And while I want them to succeed, for all of our constituents' interest that they do so, what we have seen so far does not fill me with hope. One of the Health Secretary's first choices when entering government was to pause the new hospital programme and put its future at risk. This was despite the Secretary of State and the Chancellor travelling the country throughout the election, meeting candidates who are promising a new hospital in their local area. But just like their promises to the farmers, the pensioners and the businesses, these were hollow words. I will give way. Yeah, I will give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. The Conservatives committed to restoring and renewing our hospitals, and my constituents in Epping Forest depend on the Princess Alexandra Hospital in Harlow and Whipps Cross Hospital in Leytonstone, despite clear promises made by Labour on these hospitals prior to the election. The Labour government has now delayed the rebuilding of these two vital hospitals, particularly galling that Whipps Cross has planning and the car park has already started. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the Labour government should re-evaluate their priorities and crack on with delivering the rebuilds promised on Princess Alexandra and Whipps Cross?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend that they should. But unfortunately, what we have learnt from this Labour government is their promises don't mean very much at all. Yeah.
To the Shadow Minister for giving way. On that point about promises not meaning very much, she will be aware that the previous Conservative government promised West Hertfordshire a new hospital. In 2023, the Conservative government, as was then, said that this was fully funded, and yet there is still not a spade in the ground. Could she explain where that money disappeared to, please?
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. I'm afraid, actually, the previous Secretary of State made it very clear that this was fully funded and this would be built. What has changed since then is that we have a new government, and this new government has made the choice not to build that hospital. These are choices that the new government must own. The Secretary of State commissioned a Darcy review when he came into power, which highlighted the need for more capital investment in the NHS. Yet he decided not to prioritise the delivery of these new hospitals. To govern is to choose, and he has chosen not to deliver these hospitals. We set out our commitment to deliver these new hospitals on time and with the agreement of the then Chancellor. Of course, spending decisions for a future Parliament cannot be made. The Secretary of State has chosen not to make the same commitment. Yes, I will give way.
Grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I think it may be helpful to her if I correct a couple of facts in what she's saying. My predecessor, the then Member of Parliament, Chelsea and Fulham, made a clear statement on his election literature that he'd secured the funding for the refurbishment and rebuilding of Charing Cross Hospital. On coming to power, I spoke to the Chief Executive of the hospital. He said he'd had no such reassurance from the government. On coming to power, we found that there was no money set aside for this promised and guaranteed refurbishment. And it wasn't just Charing Cross Hospital. Right across the country, claims were made by the previous government about having found the funding, which simply, when we came to power, were found not to be true. And your honourable friend talking to you at the moment, of course, lives in my constituency, so he's well aware of the accuracy of what I'm saying. Would she like to reflect? I know, I'll get complaints about my bins again now. Would she like to reflect on the accuracy of what she's saying in the light of the facts as I set them out to her?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his intervention, but I'm afraid he's not correct. The previous government had committed very clearly, the previous Chancellor had committed very clearly to this money and to this hospital building project. The current government have not chosen to meet that commitment. These are choices that are being made. So for now, patients and staff are being denied the quality facility they deserve for decades. For some hospitals, construction work will now not begin until 2039. Can the Minister confirm he will write to me with a date for when each hospital will be completed? It also sets out the lack of ambition from the Labour government. There are 40 hospitals in waves 1 to 3 of their programme, 40 hospitals over 15 years, but there are 515 acute specialist community hospitals in England. At this pace, that is a 200-year cycle, nearly, of replacement of the NHS estate. That's the equivalent of a hospital being built in 1825, not being replaced until this year, under Labour's so-called ambitious programme. We can all see the pressures facing the Chancellor as her economic mismanagement hits our country. You cannot tax your way to growth, and perhaps yet that is another reason why growth forecasts have been cut yet again. How do we know that Labour won't come for those already delayed new hospitals in a year or two with further delays or further cancellations? They've made clear that these new hospitals are not their priority. Will the Minister give us that guarantee? I will give way.
Go back to Charing Cross for a moment. In 2012, it used to be the main hospital in my constituency before it went to my honourable friend. The Conservative government proposed to demolish it. It took a 7-year campaign by residents to get a reprieve. It went into the new hospitals programme and then it came out again under the Conservative government in 2023 because the RAC hospitals went in. That's their history. Has she been living in a different world for the last decade? Because it's been one of not just underfunding, but threats to demolish and close hospitals and then to remove them from a programme they invented. It's only now that it's actually in a viable programme and it's getting the help and support it needs to be the world-class hospital we know it to be.
Shadow Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I confess to not being terribly au fait with a particular hospital of Charing Cross back to 2012, which was before I was elected. It's not a hospital I have personally worked in as a doctor. But I'm advised it was Jeremy Hunt, when he was Health Secretary, that kept this open. Absolutely. And I'm sure that his local residents will be disappointed that this Labour government have chosen not to rebuild it till 2035. Yes. Will Labour, in an attempt to fill the black holes of their creation, return to PFI contracts to bridge the gap between the spending they want and the fiscal situation that they have created? I saw firsthand the disastrous agreements that were reached that led to extortionate costs and ridiculous inflexibility. To give just one example, I remember being very pleased to get myself my first office of my own as a doctor when I was promoted. And I was given a desk, a computer, thank you, and a whiteboard, a large whiteboard, and I said, well, how do I get this put up on the wall? And they said to me, oh, you can't have it put up on the wall, because if we have to get it put up on the wall, that will cost £800. This is more than a decade ago, £800. And I thought to myself, why is it costing £800? I'll go and get some no-nails from the local hardware store, and I'll put it up myself. Oh, you can't do that, because it's the deal that was negotiated. It's against the contract. Yes. In total, there are around 700 PFI contracts, with a capital value of 57 billion and around 160 billion still to be paid for their use and maintenance. During COVID in 2020-2021, analysis from The Guardian found nearly £500 million was being spent purely on interest charges. This is money that is not being spent on patient care, and a long-lasting legacy from the last time Labour were in power and they were trying to get around their fiscal rules. These were fundamentally bad deals, yes. And we can see yet again that when Labour negotiate, the taxpayer loses. Despite 14 years in opposition, Labour came into office without a plan for what they actually wanted to do for the NHS. Instead, it has been review after review after review, consultation after consultation, with very little action or delivery for what it means for patients and the taxpayer. They hike taxes on GP practices, community pharmacies, and even children's hospices, only to give them some of that money back and expect them to be grateful for it. They cut the winter fuel payment for millions of the most vulnerable people in the country, then sit back and watch the number of pensioners attending A&E this winter soar. They caved into the trade union demands with an inflation-busting pay rise in return for no modernisation or productivity reforms, and the threats to strike again are already back. They scrapped our productivity plan, which we had already fully funded, which would unlock billions in savings by the end of the decade. So we turn to where we are now. We welcome capital funding to continue the programmes we started in government for the new surgical hubs and diagnostics. I will.
I thank the honourable member for giving way and for finding me. I have a question to which I know the answer. The question is how many new hospitals were built in the last 5 years? And the answer, of course, was 0. Isn't it the case that the 40 new hospitals promised by the last government weren't new, weren't hospitals? There certainly weren't 40 of them.
Shadow Minister.
Thank you for the intervention. Actually, we used the same definition as Tony Blair used when he was Prime Minister of new hospitals. Yeah. But how much of the initial capital funding that's allocated in the last budget will be used to do repairs for hospitals that should be rebuilt? As the Liberal Democrat spokesperson said, will those delays lead to costing more money, both because work that would otherwise be unnecessary will have to be done to keep places open, and also because inflation, which we see rising under this government? How much will the extra national insurance job tax cost the contractors building these new hospitals and undertaking the maintenance and repair? These additional costs will be passed on to the NHS. Will that lead to less repair work undertaken, or will the government be making cuts elsewhere? If so, where will those cuts fall? The Chancellor has already hiked the taxes on working people and businesses. Today we saw that borrowing has also increased by £30 billion a year, with debt piling up and inflation on the rise. How does the Minister intend for future repairs and buildings to be funded? Yet more tax rises, more borrowing, bringing back PFI, cutting other areas of spending? Ultimately, these are the decisions of government. To govern is to choose. This government must own its own choices. Sadly, it's the public that will need to pay for them.
Before I call the first speaker, I am announcing an immediate 5-minute time limit for backbench speeches, with the exception of the Chair of the Select Committee. I now call Chris Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A few months ago, I stood in this House and told a story that, frankly, I wish I didn't have to tell. It was about my 91-year-old grandmother, the night we had to rush her to hospital with a suspected heart attack, only to be told on arrival that the average wait time was 9.5 hours. Our brilliant NHS staff worked tirelessly, but after 14 years of Tory neglect, the truth is painfully clear. Our health service has been pushed to breaking point, and my family did not get the urgent care we needed or deserved. But I know that my story isn't unique. I hear it time and time again, on the doorstep, in community centres, and in my constituency surgeries. There is a painful fear shared by so many that the NHS we all depend on won't be there when we need it most. And let's be honest about why this is. It's not because our NHS staff aren't working hard enough, far from it. They are heroes in every sense of the word. I will, yes.
Would give way on that point about how brilliant our NHS staff are, and I asked him, does he agree with me, first of all, in commending my dad on his 40 years service badge that he got as an NHS staff member, it has to be put on record, and secondly, on the government's laser focus on supporting NHS staff to stay in the NHS and work their way up the ranks and lead a fulfilled career serving our constituents.
Thank my honourable friend for that intervention and for the work her family have done for our National Health Service, because it's not their fault that our NHS has been let down. It's because Tory government after Tory government, decision after decision, 14 years of Conservative mismanagement has hollowed out our health service. And I welcome the opportunity to discuss this important issue today. While I might not see eye to eye on everything with the Liberal Democrats, there is one truth we cannot ignore. The NHS is facing serious challenges and real change and investment is needed. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, people back home aren't crying out for more motions. They're crying out for action, for delivery, for change they can see and feel. And with this Labour government, they are finally getting it. Because when we came into office, we didn't come in to manage decline. We came in to turn things around, to rebuild, to restore a sense of hope and pride in our public services, starting with our NHS. Now, we've seen that work across the country, with waiting lists falling 6 months in a row now. But in my city, this government has finally secured funding for the new Women's and Children's Hospital that residents in Milton Keynes, a growing city, so desperately need, with construction set to start 2027 to 2028. For too long, families have walked through the doors of my local hospital that simply isn't fit for purpose, with some of the longest waiting lists in the country. And let me be equally clear, it is completely unacceptable that it has taken this long to get funding in place. Milton Keynes has been one of the fastest growing cities in the country for years, and we've been left with far fewer hospital beds than we deserve or than the national average. And despite some of the comments we've heard from members opposite, and despite the Conservative government plastering the new hospital on all of their leaflets, does anyone want to take a guess how much funding was actually secured by my hospital by the last Conservative government? Fully funded, you'd assume it was 100%, 50%, 10%, 4% of the fully funded hospital they were promised was actually secured by the previous government. So it's this government that has found the other 96% to ensure that we can finally get the hospital that my city so desperately deserves built. We are now trying to deliver a hospital delayed not by local failure but by national diva, and thanks to this government I get to be the MP that delivers what Tory MP after Tory MP promised my city but failed to deliver. But Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to ensure that we don't face further delays, not just because of the health risks to my city but because of the cost increases. I've been told that every single month this project is held up costs an extra £700,000. That's £700,000 that could be invested in other important projects that have been mentioned by members across this House. One potential hold-up is the Hospital 2.0 programme, which I'm told still isn't complete. So can I ask the Minister to look at whether this important work doesn't hold up projects like in Milton Keynes that we know are ready to go. We need to fast-track through the Treasury to ensure that once the go-ahead is given, there are no further bureaucratic blockages, especially given we have a track record in Milton Keynes of building to budget and on timetable. Give us the tools and we will build the hospital. But Madam Deputy Speaker, we also must be honest about what happens after the ribbon is cut. Because even if we build this hospital, our health system in Milton Keynes will still be operating under immense strain. Thanks to the legacy of the last government, our ICB is one of, if not the most underfunded per person in the entire country. That has real consequences. It means that places like my local hospice, Willen Hospice, which provide vital end-of-life care to many members of my family, are being left to scrape by. This Sunday, I will be running the London Marathon for our local hospice because I care deeply about the work they do. But marathons shouldn't be the funding model for our healthcare system. We need sustainable investment, and that starts with fairer funding for our ICB and fairer treatment for a city that has been overlooked for too long. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll support anything in this House that helps us fix our NHS. I'll work with anybody who wants to rebuild it. But I'll also say this. I'm proud to finally be a member of a government that isn't just talking about the problem, it's getting on with the solution. Let's build that hospital, let's fund our services properly, let's fix what's broken, and let's give people back the healthcare system they so desperately deserve. Thank you.
Chair of the Select Committee, Layla Moran. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Lord Darcy's independent investigation of the NHS clearly set out that the impact of capital starvation of the NHS in recent years and the importance of capital spending in fixing the health service. The report highlighted substantial shortfalls in capital investment, combined with a tendency to raid capital budgets to cover in-year spending deficits. So I welcome today's Liberal Democrat motion, allowing Parliament to highlight how important these issues are to the public. In fact, it's the second Liberal Democrat opposition day, and it's the second time we've debated health and care. And because it's a priority for the country, so it is a priority for us. The Health and Social Care Select Committee has taken a keen interest in the new hospitals programme. We've challenged the government to maintain its capital spending and not fall into the traps of the past, where capital spending was redirected to fund day-to-day spending. So I was pleased to, before, receive confirmation, and now again from the dispatch box, from the department, that the Chancellor's changes to the fiscal rules will stop future raids on the capital budgets. That's the CDEL budget, for those who observe such things, to fund the RDEL, or the day-to-day spending budget, and that is hugely welcome. However, while the protection of capital budgets is reassuring, I remain concerned about some of the transparency of how the funding is allocated by the Treasury. Now, the charge levelled at the government is that funding is being funnelled into acute care to tackle the waiting lists at the expense of funding primary care infrastructure and care in the community. So clearly on commitments, we will not be seeing capital funding sufficient to meet anything close to the unfunded promises made by the Tories in 2020. Nevertheless, the principle of investing in our hospital infrastructure is a good one, with money saved in the long run on maintenance and emergency repairs, as well as providing a better quality of care. In the policy paper plan for implementing the new hospitals programme, the government stated the funding will only reach £3 billion in the early 2030s due to, and I quote, other key priorities in health spending, such as funding to enable Secretary of State's 3 shifts. That is a good thing, but we need transparency about how the decisions were made over which projects were chosen.
In January, the Secretary of State did provide criteria by which the schemes were scored and funding allocated, such as site constraints, maturity of planning permission. But it was disappointing that I understand, and I'm willing to be corrected, that this review was made without the involvement of trust teams responsible for delivering the rebuilding programmes. And as of last month, no trust with the new hospitals programme scheme has been provided with the full details of how they were scored specifically against the criteria. The committee has asked how the department is prioritising schemes and has not received a clear answer. So the question is very simple. In the interests of transparency, will the Secretary of State publish for every single new hospital programme scheme that was subject to last year's review the details and findings of the department's assessment of them against each of the criteria that was published alongside his statement in the House of Commons on the 20th of January 2025? It's the very least that is deserved by those schemes who felt deprioritised, and we're hearing many examples of those across this House. But bluntly, and I choose to believe this is inadvertent, but it does frankly just look a bit shady. We've seen this happen before with the previous government, with the levelling up money. And the Public Accounts Committee, who I know many members of this House have also been a member of, as was I, has a motto that sunlight is the best disinfectant. So if the answer is they will not publish that detailed assessment, then the Minister needs to explain why. So to my local area, which is, like so many other areas, also affected by this. The John Radcliffe Hospital, which serves much of Oxfordshire, I visited it last year, and I saw firsthand how their capacity to deliver care is being severely constrained by the size and condition of the physical estate. In particular, we went to go visit the old site of the neonatal intensive care unit. They had to move the unit because they were literally worried about the ceiling coming down on sick children and on incubators. It was atrocious. They also want to be world leading. They are a specialist tertiary care hospital, and that means that they are able to perform very specialist surgery. They want a new building to do that in, and when they put the bid to government worth £28 million, they were rejected. So instead, they've gone out to seek private financing, and it's now going to cost the Trust £46 million to deliver the exact same building. Instead, would it not have made sense for the government to allow them to have even borrowed from government in order to build it and then pay it back from their own reserves over time? Think what they could have done with that £18 million. I will, of course, give way.
And I know the John Radcliffe Hospital myself, as it says in my constituents. She's made a very powerful case about the amount of money that potentially been lost by it through the process. I do wonder, however, if she would reflect on the role played by her party, in particular the member for Kingston Surbiton, and the amount of money wasted on the disastrous top-down reorganisation of the NHS under the coalition government.
That was quite the segue. I have to say, we're focused here on the capital estate. We all know that there were problems with the Lansley review, and in fact, I welcome the fact that it's being unravelled. I was pretty vocal about it at the time as well. The savings that John Radcliffe alone could have realised could have been spent into hospital at home, into other ways that we could have diverted people coming into the A&Es in the first place. But across the wider University Hospitals Trust, there's £100 million of backlog that's deemed as high or significant risk. Pausing or delaying plans to rebuild hospitals is a false economy. And hospitals around the country, including the John Radcliffe, are overspending on maintenance as a result. And it's not limited to our hospitals. We are also seeing it for GP practices, many of whom date from well before 1948. And in fact, I will declare an interest. My own surgery, Summertown Health Centre, is one of those practices. It's doing incredibly well, despite working out of a very old Victorian building. They are desperate for a new site. They were deemed one of the top priorities for the ICB, but I do note the £102 million, I think it was the figure, that was mentioned by the Minister earlier. It frankly doesn't touch the sides. And like the John Radcliffe case, what the Summertown Health Centre is now doing is going out to seek private finance, which they will find a way to pay back slowly over time. So this isn't money that the Exchequer has to even lay out in advance. This is money that they could get back, even with inflation, would be less than what they would have to pay to go out and do this with private finance. And I would ask the government to think innovatively about this. This isn't PFI in the same way. This is actually the government using its own borrowing rules to allow investment in vital public services. It makes no sense that they can't do it. And when it comes to mental health services, we have the incredible Warnford in Oxfordshire. The Warnford Park in Oxford will provide a new cutting-edge mental health hospital surrounded by research and innovation hub. Groundbreaking research is planned on understanding brain health, discovering new drug therapies and new forms of treatment. And this is a plan, it's a great vision. It will cost £500 million. We do have private benefactors willing to feed into that, including local businesses. But again, where is the funding pot for mental health trusts? Because they were excluded from the new hospitals programme, and it isn't at all clear where that kind of money might be found. I'd be great. Yep, absolutely.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I would like to share a story of a constituent that called me last night. Her daughter had psychosis and was in the local hospital, locked in a room with 2 security guards outside on a mattress on the floor. She was there for a week, waiting for mental health provision in a setting outside of the hospital. And I'd like the Minister to tell me what mental health provision will be in place. Thank you.
I'm very grateful to her and so sorry to hear about the experience of her constituent. I think in the Lord Darcy report there are some stark pictures of him sitting in substandard accommodation for the very sickest in our society. And the Health and Social Care Select Committee is actually currently undertaking an inquiry into severe mental ill health, because we know that so often mental health is forgotten in the NHS. It is a sad thing that the mental health investment standard well, it's a good thing that that's being continued, but the overall spend as a proportion of NHS spend is going down for the very first time in the last few years. This year, we hope very much that this is not a trend and is a one-off, and it will continue to rise as of next year. But for the Warnford, what we want is to understand from that is correct. What we need to understand is what are the new innovative pots of funds that we can put together. We understand that the government is working cross-department. This will have advantage to DSIT as much as it would for the Department for Health and Social Care. Where are these pots of money? They are important because, and I'll end simply by saying I completely agree with what the thrust of this motion is trying to say, and indeed what the government itself has said, that if we invest in capital expenditure, we need to take an invest to save approach. We know that this matters to our constituents. We know they can't get the services that they so desperately need. And if we are to achieve the 3 shifts, we shouldn't be pitting them against each other. Investing in capital will help the 3 shifts to succeed, and we do will, the government and the NHS, to succeed.
And with an immediate 4-minute time limit, Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member for bringing forward this debate. We will be talking a lot about Milton Keynes, because you wait for a speech about Milton Keynes Hospital and you get 2 at once. For me, it's a really personal story about Milton Keynes Hospital. For me, my family, my in-laws, unfortunately, I lost both my in-laws in the years leading up to me being elected to this place. And what I would like to say in terms of the care that both my family and my in-laws and my children have had is that the team at Milton Keynes Hospital, the staff, from the CEO to the consultants, to the doctors, to the nurses, to the porters, are all so professional. And the work that they have had to do to keep the NHS even going over the last 14 years is something that I'm sure every person in this House would want to join me in thanking their absolute persistence. I've been working closely with the hospital in my constituency for many, many years. As Deputy Leader of the Council in Milton Keynes, the Council had to step in when the government didn't. It was with funding from the Council that we were able to build the new cancer centre. It's with funding from the Council that we were able to build the new radiotherapy unit, which will open very, very soon. But it's also with a close working relationship with the Council that we have some of the lowest bed blocking in the country. With our teams integrated in that hospital, we make sure that people that are able to go home with a care package as soon as possible. because it is our belief in Milton Keynes, and it was my belief as deputy leader, that people want to be in their homes. But despite all of that, Milton Keynes Hospital has had some of the highest waiting lists in the country, despite all of the work. This is partly due to the 14 years of underfunding of Milton Keynes. But when you have over 30,000 people waiting for non-urgent elective operations, and 1,762 of them have been waiting for more than a year, these do not feel non-urgent. These are the cases that don't allow people to live a proper life, to play with their grandchildren, to go back to work as fast as they should. It has both that social cost and that economic cost. I'm pleased to say that under the investment done by this government to reduce waiting times, we have seen waiting times going down, but they are still too high. Now, unlike a lot of the other hospitals we're going to talk about today, much of the Milton Keynes issue is that we are the fastest growing area in our region. In fact, we are growing at double the rate of anywhere